Hannibal Barca was a name that sent shivers down the spines of Romans in the ancient world. As a Carthaginian general with unmatched military genius, Hannibal faced a daunting challenge: how to outmaneuver and defeat the powerful Roman Republic, which held dominance over the Mediterranean. The Punic Wars were a bitter struggle for supremacy, and in the Second Punic War, Hannibal devised a plan so audacious that it seemed impossible. Instead of confronting Rome head-on in the sea or along predictable land routes, he decided to take his army, including war elephants, over the Alps, a feat never attempted on such a scale. This decision, both brilliant and dangerous, would make history. Hannibal's vision wasn't born out of mere ambition. It was deeply rooted in revenge and strategy. Carthage, located in modern-day Tunisia, had been humiliated by Rome in the First Punic War, losing its naval power and territorial influence. Hannibal grew up with an intense hatred for Rome, instilled in him by his father, Hannibal Barca, a prominent Carthaginian leader. When Hannibal became commander, he vowed to challenge Rome's growing dominance. However, Rome's formidable navy made a direct invasion nearly impossible. Any attempt to cross the Mediterranean would have been intercepted by Roman ships, ending the campaign before it began. To surprise his enemies, Hannibal needed an unconventional approach that bypassed their strengths. The plan Hannibal envisioned was revolutionary. By crossing the Alps and invading Italy from the north, he would strike at Rome's heartland, catching them completely off guard. This route avoided Roman-controlled waters and capitalized on the element of surprise, but it came with enormous risks. The Alps were treacherous, a natural fortress of snow-covered peaks, freezing temperatures, and narrow mountain passes. Crossing such a hostile environment with an army of tens of thousands of soldiers, cavalry, and elephants seemed suicidal to most. Yet, for Hannibal, the potential reward outweighed the dangers. A successful invasion could destabilize Rome's alliances, weaken their hold on Italy, and force them into a vulnerable position. Hannibal's army was impressive, not just in size but in diversity. It included soldiers from various regions under Carthaginian influence: North African infantry, Iberian warriors, Numidian cavalry, and the famous war elephants. These elephants were a crucial psychological weapon. In ancient warfare, elephants symbolized power and fear. Roman soldiers had never faced such creatures in battle, and Hannibal hoped the sight of towering, tusked beasts would terrify his opponents. But the challenge of transporting elephants across the Alps was unprecedented. Even for seasoned generals, managing an army through harsh mountain terrain was difficult enough, let alone moving animals that required enormous amounts of food and careful handling. Before reaching the Alps, Hannibal faced another challenge: securing a safe route through hostile territories. His army began its journey in Iberia, modern-day Spain, crossing the Pyrenees into Gaul, modern France. Along the way, he negotiated with local tribes, forming alliances with some and fighting others. Hannibal's ability to adapt and navigate political complexities was as remarkable as his military acumen. He understood that his campaign success depended not only on his army's strength, but also on maintaining morale and securing provisions for the grueling journey ahead. The decision to bring elephants, while ambitious, was not without controversy. Even among Hannibal's own officers, there were doubts about whether the elephants could survive the journey. These animals, accustomed to warmer climates, were ill-prepared for the freezing temperatures and rocky paths of the Alps. But Hannibal was determined. The elephants were not just tools of war, they were symbols of Carthage's strength and resolve. If he could lead them across the Alps, it would demonstrate his army's resilience and his own ingenuity. As Hannibal's forces approached the base of the Alps, the scale of the challenge became apparent. Towering peaks loomed ahead, their summits blanketed in snow even in the warmer months. The narrow passes were treacherous, with steep drops on either side, and the weather was unpredictable, with icy winds and sudden snowstorms. The journey would test every soldier's endurance and every leader's resolve. Yet Hannibal pressed on, inspiring his troops with promises of glory and the assurance that their efforts would bring Rome to its knees. Hannibal's decision to cross the Alps was not just a bold military maneuver, it was a statement of defiance and creativity. Where others saw an insurmountable barrier, Hannibal saw an opportunity to change the course of history. The journey ahead would be brutal, marked by immense hardship and significant losses, but it was also the beginning of one of the most remarkable campaigns in military history. Hannibal's march through the Alps remains a symbol of his genius, audacity, and unwavering determination to challenge an empire that seemed invincible. The journey through the Alps was one of the most daring and grueling feats in military history. Hannibal's army, which had already endured weeks of marching and skirmishing through hostile territories, now faced its greatest challenge, crossing the towering mountain range to reach the Italian heartland. The Alps were an imposing natural barrier, with jagged peaks, narrow passes, and treacherous cliffs that made even the idea of crossing them seem impossible. Yet Hannibal, driven by his vision of defeating Rome on its soil, pressed forward with unwavering determination. The journey tested the limits of human and animal endurance, turning what was already a bold campaign into a legendary story of survival and perseverance. As the army ascended the lower slopes, the difficulties quickly became apparent. The weather grew colder with every step, and the terrain became more rugged. Soldiers who were accustomed to warmer climates struggled to adjust to the freezing temperatures, while the steep, rocky paths made progress slow and perilous. The horses and elephants, essential to Hannibal's strategy, had to be carefully guided through narrow passes where a single misstep could send them plummeting to their deaths. Supplies, already stretched thin after the long march through Gaul, became even scarcer as the army climbed higher. Food was hard to find in the barren, snow-covered landscape, and hunger began to take its toll. Hannibal's leadership was put to the ultimate test during this phase of the journey. He knew that maintaining the morale of his troops was as important as overcoming the physical challenges of the mountains. To inspire them, he often walked alongside his soldiers, sharing their hardships and encouraging them with speeches. Hannibal reminded them of the glory that awaited them in Italy, where they would face the Romans as liberators rather than invaders. He painted vivid pictures of the riches and honor that would be theirs if they succeeded, keeping their focus on the rewards rather than the suffering of the moment. His charisma and ability to connect with his men were instrumental in preventing despair from taking hold. The weather added another layer of difficulty. The higher the army climbed, the more unpredictable it became. Sudden snowstorms reduced visibility to near zero, while icy winds cut through the soldiers' clothing and armor. The cold claimed the lives of many, as frostbite and hypothermia set in among those who were already weak from hunger and exhaustion. The elephants, though hardy, also suffered in the harsh conditions. These animals, accustomed to the warm climates of North Africa, struggled to find footing on the icy paths and required constant care to prevent them from succumbing to the cold. Despite these challenges, the sight of the elephants trudging through the snow became a symbol of the army's determination, inspiring the soldiers to keep moving forward. The physical dangers of the Alps were matched by the threat posed by hostile tribes. The mountains were home to various groups who viewed Hannibal's army as intruders. These tribes launched ambushes, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. They hurled rocks down from the heights, causing chaos among the troops and animals below. Hannibal responded with his usual tactical brilliance, organizing countermeasures that minimized losses and allowed the army to continue its march. He also used diplomacy where possible, negotiating safe passage through certain areas in exchange for promises of alliance or other incentives. Hannibal's ability to adapt to these challenges demonstrated why he was one of history's greatest commanders. As the army climbed higher into the Alps, the path grew even more treacherous. Narrow passes barely wide enough for a single file of men forced the army to move at a snail's pace, creating bottlenecks and increasing the risk of accidents. In some areas, the path was so precarious that soldiers had to crawl on their hands and knees to avoid slipping. When the army encountered stretches of the trail that had been destroyed by landslides or blocked by debris, Hannibal ordered his engineers to clear the way. This often involved backbreaking labor, as soldiers used primitive tools to carve paths through solid rock or construct makeshift bridges over deep ravines. These efforts delayed the march, but were essential for ensuring the army's survival. One of the most dramatic moments of the journey came when the army reached a particularly treacherous section of the route. Here, the path had been completely obliterated by a recent landslide, leaving a sheer drop on one side and a vertical cliff on the other. Hannibal, ever resourceful, devised a solution. He ordered his men to build fires against the rock face and then doused the heated stone with vinegar to weaken it. Once the rock had been softened, they used tools to break it apart, creating a new path wide enough for the elephants and wagons to pass. This ingenious tactic demonstrated Hannibal's ability to think creatively under pressure and underscored his determination to overcome any obstacle. The army eventually began its descent, but the challenges did not end there. Descending the Alps was almost as dangerous as climbing them, as the soldiers and animals had to navigate steep, slippery slopes while carrying the scars of the grueling journey. Despite these hardships, Hannibal managed to keep his forces together, ensuring that a significant portion of his army survived the crossing. When they finally emerged from the mountains into the plains of northern Italy, they were battered and diminished, but their spirits were unbroken. The sight of Hannibal and his elephants marching into the Po Valley was a stunning and terrifying spectacle for the local population and the Roman forces who had not believed such a feat was possible. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps was a monumental achievement that forever cemented his place in history. Although he lost nearly half his army during the journey, the sheer audacity and determination it took to complete the march inspired awe in his allies and struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. The Alps, once seen as an impenetrable barrier, became the stage for one of the most legendary military maneuvers of all time. Hannibal's success in reaching Italy set the stage for a series of battles that would test Rome's resilience and redefine the course of the Second Punic War. When Hannibal and his army emerged from the Alps into the plains of northern Italy, it was as though they had stepped out of myth. Their journey, marked by immense suffering and incredible perseverance, had not only demonstrated the resilience of Hannibal's forces, but had also shocked the Roman world. The idea of an enemy crossing the Alps with an army, especially one that included war elephants, was previously unthinkable. Now, with the element of surprise fully in his favor, Hannibal was poised to reshape the Second Punic War and challenge the might of the Roman Republic in its own territory. Hannibal's campaign in Italy began with swift and decisive victories. He quickly established alliances with discontented tribes in the region, including the Gauls, who resented Roman control. By aligning himself with these groups, Hannibal gained reinforcements and supplies that bolstered his weakened forces. His ability to adapt to the political landscape was just as critical as his military strategies. Unlike Rome, which often ruled through force and intimidation, Hannibal presented himself as a liberator, offering autonomy to those who opposed Roman rule. This approach not only strengthened his army but also destabilized Roman influence in the region. The Battle of Trebia was Hannibal's first major test in Italy, and it showcased his tactical brilliance. Facing a larger Roman force led by the consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, Hannibal lured the enemy into a trap. Using his Numidian cavalry to harass the Roman lines, he provoked them into crossing the icy Trebia River. The Romans, soaked and chilled from the crossing, were then ambushed by Hannibal's forces, including a concealed detachment that attacked from the rear. The result was a devastating Roman defeat, with thousands of soldiers killed or captured. The victory sent a clear message. Hannibal was a force to be reckoned with, and Rome could no longer take its security for granted. Hannibal's next major engagement, the Battle of Lake Trasimene, further cemented his reputation as a master tactician. In one of the largest ambushes in military history, Hannibal used the terrain to his advantage, positioning his forces along a narrow pass near the lake. As the Roman army, led by Gaius Flaminius, marched through the pass, Hannibal's troops struck from the hillsides, cutting off their retreat and trapping them against the water. The battle was a slaughter, with over 15,000 Romans killed and thousands more captured. Flaminius himself was among the dead. The psychological impact of this defeat was enormous, as it demonstrated Hannibal's ability to outmaneuver and outthink even seasoned Roman commanders. The pinnacle of Hannibal's campaign in Italy came at the Battle of Cannae, a confrontation that has been studied by military strategists for centuries. Faced with a massive Roman army of nearly 90,000 men, Hannibal employed a brilliant strategy to turn their strength into a weakness. He positioned his troops in a crescent formation, with his weakest units in the center and his strongest forces on the flanks. As the Romans advanced, they pushed into the center, believing they were breaking Hannibal's line. In reality, they were walking into a trap. Hannibal's flanks closed in, encircling the Roman army in a maneuver known as a double envelopment. The result was catastrophic for Rome. An estimated 50,000 to 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed in a single day, making Cannae one of the bloodiest battles in history. The victory at Cannae was Hannibal's greatest triumph, and it shook Rome to its core. For a time, it seemed as though the Republic might collapse under the weight of its losses. Several of Rome's allies in southern Italy defected to Hannibal's side, further eroding Roman power. Yet, despite his success on the battlefield, Hannibal faced a critical challenge. He lacked the resources to lay siege to the city of Rome itself. His strategy relied on weakening Rome through attrition and encouraging its allies to abandon it, but Rome's resilience proved stronger than he anticipated. One of the key turning points in the war came with the rise of Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus. A brilliant strategist in his own right, Scipio recognized that the key to defeating Hannibal lay not in direct confrontation, but in cutting off his support. While Hannibal continued his campaign in Italy, Scipio launched an invasion of Carthaginian territories in Spain, effectively severing Hannibal's supply lines and eliminating his base of operations. This strategy forced Carthage to recall Hannibal to defend his homeland, setting the stage for the climactic Battle of Zama. At Zama, Hannibal faced Scipio in a battle that would decide the fate of the war. Scipio, having learned from Hannibal's tactics, countered the threat of the war elephants by creating gaps in his lines to let the charging beasts pass through harmlessly. The Roman forces, now more disciplined and experienced, defeated Hannibal's army decisively. The loss marked the end of Carthage's hopes for victory in the Second Punic War and cemented Rome's dominance in the Mediterranean. Hannibal's campaign in Italy, while ultimately unsuccessful, had a profound and lasting impact on history. His victories demonstrated the importance of strategy, adaptability, and psychological warfare, influencing military thought for generations. The Second Punic War also shaped the trajectory of the Roman Republic, strengthening its resolve and leading to reforms that would help it become an empire. Hannibal himself became a legendary figure, admired even by his enemies for his audacity and genius. His march through the Alps and his victories in Italy remain symbols of what can be achieved through determination and ingenuity, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Though Hannibal could not bring Rome to its knees, his legacy endures as one of history's greatest generals, a man who challenged an empire and left an indelible mark on the world. His campaign serves as a reminder of the power of ambition and the resilience of those who dare to defy the impossible.